Welcome to Eat, Drink, Think. I'm Amy O'Neill Houck. In this podcast from Edible Communities, a network of magazines published across North America, we celebrate all things local and sustainable in the food world. Today, we're speaking with Julia Turshen. Julia is a cookbook author and recipe developer who also wears many other hats. Her last book, Simply Julia, is a bestseller. Julia has both a newsletter and an award-winning podcast called Keep Calm and Cook On. She recently spent a season as a farmhand at the farm where she's a CSA member. She's one of the people behind the Full Fridge Club, a local meal service in her region, which she says is a safe, positive, and affirming workspace for queer and trans folks in food. She teaches online classes most Sundays. And she's a competitive powerlifter. Julia's newest book, What Goes With What, is hot off the presses and is a collection of 100 recipes. But more than that, it's a visual guide to putting meals together and a method for cooks of all experience levels to get more comfortable using their personal taste and intuition. Julia, welcome to Eat, Drink, Think.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a lovely introduction. I feel like you summed up a lot very efficiently, and I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're delighted to have you. Well, readers of your newsletter and folks who follow you online will have a taste of how you think with your pen, because both platforms are decorated with your delightful handwritten grid-based guides to everything from smoothies to snack plates. Can you talk a little bit about this connection between your brain and the page and how it led you to the new book?
Sure. Yeah, I love the way you describe that. It's so funny because, I've ended up in my work doing so much of my own handwriting, whether it's these charts, which I'll tell you more about, or just, the title of my books or recipe titles. My handwriting just shows up a lot. And I wish I could give you a really meaningful reason. But the main reason is because I just refuse to learn how to use like Canva or any of those tools. I tried once and it just felt totally overwhelming to me. But I know how to write things down and then take a picture of it. So that's sort of the analog in me, and just the logistics of producing that kind of stuff. But yeah, the connection between the way my brain works and the page and these charts that I've been sharing in my newsletter on social media now are really, I think, at the heart of my new book. These charts started as a way for me to just share a bunch of ideas with people in a way that was hopefully not too overwhelming, and in a way that showed everyone really the way I think about food, which is kind of grouping things under these umbrellas. And so I think of various dishes as having like a formula. So, you mentioned some of the ones I've done, like smoothies, stuff like that, pesto, I've done soups, I've done salads, like all different kinds. And I think of all these things as having, like an infrastructure, a formula. Like the best sandwiches usually have some kind of breads, various fillings, but within those fillings, like if there's a crunchy layer or a rich layer or something, maybe a little briny or like a pickle, something like that. And once you apply that formula, you can see just the infinite number of variations you can make. And thinking about cooking this way helps me find it a lot less overwhelming. And it makes me just really understand that everything is just a riff on everything else. And so when I started writing this down on these single page charts, I think it was a way to show it rather than tell it. I think when you see it, it can kind of click in a way that, at least for me, it doesn't when I just read about it or hear about it. So making the charts was just an effort to share what is hopefully like a helpful tool. And I've learned in sharing them that it's a way for me to share, how my brain works, how I think about this kind of stuff.
I love how you use the BLT, kind of reverse engineering that into like explaining what are the elements of an amazing sandwich, because who doesn't love a BLT?
Exactly.
So that was a really nice way of sort of like backing us into the chart for someone who might think, charts, but actually because they work on the small screen, you're making them in this like very small scale. It's not like you're packing an overwhelming amount of information into this grid. It's like really, you see it and visually you kind of can take it in, in one bite almost.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the title of the book?
Sure. The book is called What Goes with What. And my mother, who was very involved in the making of this book, my mother came up with the title, and I thank her for it because I think it's great. I think it really suits the book. I'm looking at the cover of the book right now. I have a copy on my desk. It's 4-letter words. They sort of work in a grid in and of themselves. It just kind of works. And I think what the title gets at is that this is a book that kind of helps explain how to put things together, how to think about things. And I have historically really prided myself on coming up with book titles, whether for my own books or other people's books. It's like one of my favorite pastimes is to think of book titles. When I hear someone say something sort of funny or clever, I always have this moment, whether I say it out loud or not, where I'm just like, that would be a great book title. And when it came to this book, I so knew the contents of the book. I could see it before it existed. I could see the charts and the accompanying recipes. I could imagine the look and feel of the photos, of the handwriting and the charts like we talked about. All of that felt very clear to me, and the title really eluded me, and I could not think of a title for this. And it was really like the first time I've had that problem. But I just spoke a lot to my mom, and she helped me come up with this. So I really thank her for it. And I think it does, evoke hopefully the feeling people get from the book. I think there's a little bit of like a sense of confidence with this title, like what goes with what? Like there is something that goes with something. And I think that kind of confidence, that sort of feeling of empowerment is something I really want people to take away, because I think that people feel extremely intimidated by cooking. And I understand why, because it's really overwhelming. So I'm hoping with the charts and just all the material in the book and the way I write the recipes and talk about food, I just hope people walk away feeling like they've got it. And I think that's a feeling, if you're interested in cooking, that everyone is capable of feeling.
For sure. Yeah, there's a lightness maybe about the title that doesn't have the baggage of like cooking or baking. It's like, what goes with what? We can put things together and we'll have something to eat,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm glad that comes through. Yeah, that's great to hear.
Can we talk a little bit about the idea of instinct and intuition when it comes to cooking? You've worked hard to demystify cooking so home cooks not only can make recipes with ease, but stray from recipes and cook to their own taste. And it seems like maybe there's two camps of home cooks, those who see recipes as information and they already feel the permission to do their own thing, and those who take comfort in having a written guide that's been tested and vetted. In the book, you say, while I believe in the scaffolding that recipes provide and appreciate the hard work that goes into well-written and tested recipes, I'm always concerned that they can seem inflexible, like there's only one way to get it right. It sounds like part of your goal with the new book is to gently empower people to move into that first camp, right? And it's a little challenging to do on a page, I would think. You can't iterate and say like, oh, taste this, needs a little bit more acid, or do those veggies need to brown a little bit more, So how do you get people to trust their own taste and take risks?
Yeah. Gosh, this is such a great question, and I appreciate you pulling that part out of the introduction. In my mind, this is sort of like a two-part thing, like what's the role of recipes? And then also how does one learn instincts? How does one learn intuition? How do you learn to trust it? So I think when it comes to cooking, recipes have a role in that. But I don't know, I'm thinking of these things a little separately. And you mentioned in my, in the introduction, you mentioned that I teach these online cooking classes, which I do a couple times a month on Sunday afternoons. And this is something I hear myself talking about a lot in my classes, about really just trying to relay the message of trusting your intuition. And it's one of those things that I think is like easy to say and annoying to hear, because it's easy to say if you have a lot of experience and you have instincts around cooking that you trust. It's easy to say, just like, trust your instincts. And I think it's annoying to hear if you don't have that experience and you don't yet have that trust. So what I try to say is that I'll give you an example. I think that's better. We're making a soup in my class. And so maybe I'm making this up, but maybe we're sauteing some onions and carrots. And then I tell everyone, you're going to season these onions and carrots, even just salt, like it doesn't need to be anything else, but you're going to season them at this stage. And then we're going to add something else to the pot. We're going to add some broth or maybe just water, some liquid, coconut milk, whatever. We're going to season it again. We're going to season every layer of this soup until it's done. And this is the way we're going to build flavor in the whole soup, as opposed to just putting salt on at the end. So salt is just kind of sitting on top of this pot of soup. So as we're doing this, I will tell people about, this is something I don't really remind myself to do when I'm cooking. I just kind of do it automatically. Like I have this learned instinct to season at every stage. And the way I've learned this instinct is because I've made probably thousands of pots of soup. I have just done it over and over again. And I think there's no trick or hack, unfortunately, to that kind of experience. I think you just have to do something over and over again to build intuition, to build instinct around it. So I like providing different ways to be with people when they're having those experiences, whether it's like cooking with me in a class or, cooking from my cookbook. My hope is that I'm there with you. You have that feeling. And I think it's just through repetition that we build instinct and intuition. And I think that gives us a lot of, hopefully, compassion for ourselves when things don't go well. Perhaps your pot of soup is incredibly under-seasoned. Maybe it doesn't taste like very much. But hey, like that's when you get reminded of the lesson to season as you go. So it's, every experience is worthy in the kitchen. We learn something each time, even if something doesn't turn out exactly how we want it. So I think that's a bit of the building of instincts, intuition, which I guess I'm using sort of interchangeably. And in terms of recipes, my kind of running joke is that I write recipes for a living, but I don't follow them. Like I don't, I test them, of course, but I don't, when I'm just day-to-day cooking in my kitchen, making dinner for me and Grace, I'm not following a recipe. I'm just seeing what's in our fridge and putting something together. And I think that kind of ease in the kitchen is something that comes with a lot of experience. And I think recipes are a great way to build up that experience and to have, the voice of someone, hopefully, that you feel that you can trust and that you enjoy there with you while you're making something and learning, why things go together, why things work, so that you can then riff on something when you're out of an ingredient or you have something random to use up that's not in the cookbook that you're looking at, whatever it might be. So I think recipes really have a tremendous role to play in developing these like kitchen intuitions. And I think recipes are like an incredible tool for that. I think they're an incredibly supportive tool. But I don't think they're the end all be all. I think you can make a lot of food without following a recipe, which is probably something my publisher wouldn't want me to say, but that's where we are.
It seems like you kind of developing two kinds of memory, maybe muscle memory, or maybe more, maybe taste memory, but also just sort of intellectual memory. If you're working on your recipes are concise, which is one of the things that I like about them. And you maybe make it a few times and you can kind of memorize it. You might want to look back and say, well, how much ginger but the basic idea, I imagine if you make the same thing a few times, you have it down, and that's probably when that like urge to stray might start to occur. Are there other ways where you find throughout your classes or your writing that you've been able to take the stress away from people who are cooking?
I mean, I sure hope so. I think sometimes a really interesting moment happens in my classes, which is when I mess something up or something in my kitchen is broken or I've forgotten an ingredient. I taught a kids cooking class yesterday. I do them every so often. They're really fun. And we made peanut butter cookies and I was on my high horse about how useful a kitchen scale is. And I was saying about when measuring something like peanut butter, it's so sticky. that if you just add it to your bowl of your cookie batter ingredients and it's sitting on a scale, you can just, stop when you get to the right amount and you don't have to bother with measuring cups, and it's so much easier. And I'm going on and on. And then I go to turn on my kitchen scale and it's dead. The batteries are worn out. And so that made me laugh. And then I said, okay, so everything I just said, like, I stand by, but I'm not going to do that today because that device is not available for me. And I didn't have the kind of batteries that it uses. So, then I showed them how if you spray a measuring cup with like cooking spray or just rub a little oil on it, something sticky like peanut butter will like slide out of the cup. So I got to show them this like other trick, which was sort of fun. But it was like a funny moment, and something unexpected happened in my kitchen. Something didn't go to plan. And I embrace those moments because it's an opportunity for me to explain how I handle it, because these things happen all the time. So yeah, things like that, just showing, I think, the real life that happens in my kitchen, which obviously is very easy to do in my classes and in my book too. A cool thing about this new book, something I've never done before, is I took almost every photograph in the book, and that meant that I absolutely cooked everything in the book. And I just took and I'm not a professional photographer. Like, the photos are really simple. So yeah, something that was really important to me for this book was that every recipe had a photo. That's something I've never been able to do before because food photography is really expensive. But taking the photos myself meant I got to provide a photo for every recipe. So I think that in and of itself is a helpful tool. I think hopefully gives folks, a visual of what something looks like besides just reading the description. But the photos themselves are just, they're simple. I cooked everything. There was no food stylist. There was no prop stylist. There was no professional photographer. And I think that is also a helpful tool in helping people feel more comfortable, because they're not trying to mimic something that a million professionals have had their hands in to make it look so beautiful that it's almost unrealistic, which is not, not every cookbook looks that way, but I think a lot do. I think we live, in a social media fueled, media world. And I think everything just looks so incredible that it feels like when you make something and it just looks kind of fine, like you've not done the thing, like you failed in some way. And I just, I don't want anyone to feel that. So, these are things aside from, the simplicity of the recipes. You mentioned the recipes are really concise, which I appreciate.
If you've seen anything about how food photography works, sometimes it's not the actual dish that ends up being the picture, because we've had to take advantage of some sort of tricks just to make it look like the food that it's supposed to be. I imagine that's not what you're doing when you're taking the picture itself. So that might be reassuring to home cooks. But your photos look really beautiful. And I love that you got to do them yourself. And I really liked the picture of you standing outside with taking that flat lay shot.
Yes. Behind
it's like,
the scenes,
okay,
yes.
That makes it feel accessible in a way that I really liked.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Your book and others that take a different or complementary approach to cooking, or how to cook, actually, not just what to cook, seem to be gaining in popularity. Do you think that this uptick in cooking pedagogy and philosophy books is possibly happening maybe in remedy to the fact that we don't grow up cooking in school as much, or maybe if we don't have cooking role models at home?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're onto something there for sure. I think, cooking and just the labor of feeding ourselves, of having kind of just a home cooking practice is something that I think used to definitely be taught more. But I think it definitely skewed towards just teaching, girls how to do that. And so I think, that has definitely changed. I think you have a great point there. I think that also, in our just capitalism world, and people just work so much. And so I think the time to cook is more limited than ever. And cooking, even easy, fast cooking, requires time, because even if making the thing doesn't take so long, it's like you have to get the ingredients, you have to wash the pan afterwards. Like there's all of these hidden time factors that don't always get recognized. So keeping ourselves fed and keeping a kitchen running is a lot of work. And I think that kind of unpaid labor is not that valued in our culture. So it would make sense that it was, kind of put to the side. But I think that's a part of why a lot of these books exist. I think something I've noticed too, and I haven't thought that much about it, but just hearing your question, I'm just thinking of some of the books that have come out in the past few years that I think are just so wonderful, that are kind of not just like, here's things to cook, but here's how to cook, almost like cooking school in a book. And I'm thinking specifically of Sola's book. I can't remember the title of it, but Start Here, I think it's called. I can see the cover. And of course, Samin's Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat is such a seminal one. And I think books like this, I think it's important to think about who's writing them and what their perspective is, because I think so much of cooking has been from a white European, like a Western European perspective. A lot of the teaching of cooking and the people who are sort of most esteemed for cooking tend to be white men, which is interesting because I think when it comes to cooking at home, it's, these are huge generalizations, but, that's usually seen as the sphere for sort of women's work. So I think when we have books that are from authors who give us different perspectives, who offer us different ways of looking at things, that's incredibly valuable. So yeah, I think it's great that there's a proliferation of these books. And I think it's even more wonderful that the books aren't just coming from white dudes.
I think that's great too. Okay, I'm going to think back to our intuition conversation again for a minute and talk about the idea of season to taste. Among cookbook nerds and recipe developers, this can be a little controversial, but you say you really like that phrase. So some people feel like maybe it leaves the cook at sea if they don't know what the taste they're going for is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think to me, it's an important phrase, and it's one I use often because I think when we season to our taste, even if we don't quite know what that is, if we're taught to just keep adding till it tastes good, and good being a completely subjective thing, like whatever tastes good to you, I think it's a way to, learn these moments of instinct, and learn that we're making food for, ourselves or whoever we're cooking for. We're not making something for, an arbitrary, unnamed authority to come say like, oh, you've done it right. It's like, you're making dinner at your house. Like it should taste like what you want it to taste like. And, some people like if we're just talking about salt and seasoning to taste, some people like things without that much salt, on the blander side. Some people like things like super, super salty, and a lot of people like things right in the middle. And I think all of those are valid and they're all great. And I don't really care like where anyone is on that kind of salt spectrum. What I care about is that their food tastes like what they want it to taste like, and that they feel empowered to make that decision for themselves. There's also so many variables. So if I were to give you a specific measurement, can I be sure we're using the same type of salt because the salinity of salts vary by brand? What about the other ingredients? Like if we're using soup as an example, did you use homemade broth? Was that salted or not? Did you use a better than bouillon, which is something I use all the time? Did you use a boxed or a canned stock? Did you just use water? Like all of these things are going to affect the amount of salt. Like, did you add extra potatoes to the soup? Because they're going to absorb a lot of salt. Like, there's so many variables. So I think having some flexibility with ingredients and measurements allows for a little bit more accommodation of those variables. So especially when it comes to salt, I guess the biggest thing I hope I said this in the cookbook, and I know I say it in my classes all the time, but is like, add a little, taste it, add a little more. Like, it's really easy to keep adding. It's harder to take it out. So I think, any chance you have to keep tasting your food while you're cooking it, check in with it, see where it is. Don't be afraid to taste it as you're cooking, to touch it, to see, what's going on. I think that's really valuable.
It's funny when you said an unnamed authority. I was thinking in so many households that authority is perhaps the children of whatever parent is cooking saying, not too tart, not too spicy.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's so true. I don't have children, but there's a lot of kids in my life, including my best friend's kids who I adore. And, if I'm visiting with them, we live far away from each other. So when I visit, I stay with them. And I love making them breakfast, and I always put like salt and pepper on my eggs. But her kids, and this might, this changes daily, so I don't know if this is true right now, but if I put pepper, they're not going to eat them. And so, I adjust when I'm there, and that adjustment is, if there's nothing better or worse about the eggs I make at home than the ones I make there. It's, they don't require the pepper. I can put the pepper on mine separately. All these little moments can happen. I think what's nice is to be with them and making a meal and eating together. And there's no correct way to season that egg. There's just, whatever is going to make that experience as enjoyable as possible.
Yeah. And it's a form of care, knowing your eaters. You say the charts in the book represent how you think of recipes in your head, and it's clear that you think of them in terms of relationships. So with salads, you say base plus crunchy thing plus rich thing plus dressing. So let's say a cook has gotten to the point where they're going to try and riff on the idea of a chart. Do you have guidance for how to start with proportions?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think... I guess what I would say to that is to kind of reference the recipes that follow the charts in the book. Because that's a good point. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere in the book I did this. I guess in like salad dressings, I sort of said, this kind of ratio of fat to acid to seasoning. But otherwise, I guess for the most part, I gave just sort of categories and not quantities. So I think taking a look at the recipes that follow, where I do give you specific amounts, is a good way to figure out those amounts. But then, you can substitute whatever you want. So if there's, a toasted nut on a salad and you don't like whatever that nut is, you can use a different one. Or maybe you're allergic to nuts, but you want something else crunchy and you're going to use a pumpkin seed or a crouton or something. You can take a look and see, the amount of nuts I called for in the salad. And I think there's also a lot of flexibility with the proportions too. Like, to stick with the salad example, if you feel like you want so much more crunch, maybe not only do you add the nuts, but you also add the pumpkin seeds, and maybe you also add the croutons. And again, I think just having a mixture of the components that I suggest in the charts, having a little crunch, having a little richness, having something maybe briny, when you put all those things together, I really do think you're going to have something you're going to enjoy.
You took a different approach to sharing the volume of food we're creating with each recipe in this book. Can you talk about that and how and why your take on serving sizes changed?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I appreciate it because it's a small part of the book, but it's a really important part of it to me. So in my last book, Simply Julia, which came out in 2021, that was the first time I wrote about and shared in any of my work, but specifically in any of my cookbooks, that I had struggled for a very long time with an eating disorder. And and it was not something I had shared in my work or publicly, and I felt ready to in that book. The reason I decided to talk about it a little bit there was that book, the subtitle of that book was, it was Recipes for Healthy Comfort Food, and I really wanted to pause and define what I meant by that and what I meant by the word healthy, and just think about it and share a little bit more. And that is something that has continued in my life, my recovery from that, my I would say divestment from diet culture, and just finding kind of liberation within my own body and trying my best to connect that with as many other people as I can, because I think it's a collective thing. So when it came to this book, which is, we're a few years later, I've been through more of my personal kind of life around this and developed more tools and have developed more community and more support. One thing that I realized in my work as a cookbook author was that I had been for many years, on pretty much every recipe I've written, I've been giving a serving size because that is customary in recipe writing. And I realized that that was something that I wanted to pay a bit more attention to. And so I entertained the idea of abandoning serving sizes altogether. But then I thought that actually might not be so useful, because sometimes, if I see a recipe uses, let's say, 2 pounds of sweet potatoes, I can visualize how much that is and how many people that will serve. Again, because I just have years and years of experience of doing this. But not everyone knows what 2 pounds of sweet potatoes look like, or how many people they're cooking for. Should they double the recipe or not? That kind of thing. So I wanted to give some information, but I wanted to be mindful about what I was saying when I was saying something as simple as serves for, because that is, a tiny little moment in the book. It's not even a sentence, but like serves for, but it's loaded because it's like, who are these 4 people? Are they 4 adults? Are they 4 children? Are they professional athletes? Are they people in eating disorder recovery? What is their appetite? What did they just eat before they're eating this thing that serves for? What are they getting ready for? There's so many things going on. So I just added a very simple word throughout the book, which was about. Serves about 4, serves about 6. The other thing I did is that wherever I could, instead of giving you the approximate serving size, what I favor is giving you the volume measurement, telling you how much of something the recipe makes. So to go back to soup, I told you how many quarts each recipe makes of soup. And it's up for you to decide how many quarts you or your household or, your friends, whoever you're cooking for, might want. I did that wherever I could, and wherever it didn't make sense, let's say there's a chart, a section of like savory pies, like a chicken pot pie. There's like a few really good vegetarian ones, and I'm not gonna take the contents of the baking dish and put it in a measuring cup to figure out quarts. So something like that, I'll say, serves about 4, serves about 6. But I just wanted to, just be a little bit more thoughtful about how I approach that. And I think sometimes, change comes in big, loud ways. And I think sometimes just weaving it in small, quiet ways, paying attention to those kinds of moments is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. We cook and eat a lot of veggies in my house. And when I'm looking through what goes with what, I'm attracted to these vegetable recipes and methods of your finishing touches that I think turn a simple vegetable into a dish you maybe could even share with company. By the way, I think we're probably going to make your green beans for Thanksgiving this year.
Oh, good.
In the book, you say, once everything is cooked, finish with something acidic and interesting, just to balance flavors. I can't even remember which recipe we're talking about, but maybe it's in general. You could be this could be as quick as a lemon squeezed over the vegetables, or as complex as a homemade salsa matcha or carrot miso dressing. And you say that the final step is the most crucial, and it brings dimension. Can you talk about this magical idea of finishing touches?
Sure. I'm so delighted you picked that part out. I actually know exactly where that comes from in the book. It's the introduction to the roasted vegetable chart. Because I think if I would have to fact check myself on this, but I think it is the simplest chart in the book because there's only 3 columns. There's only 2 columns. I should look at it. But you basically roast the vegetables and then serve it, yes, with something kind of like acidic and interesting, this kind of finishing touch. And all the vegetables pretty much get roasted with like olive oil and salt, and that's it. Really simple. And I think that, I mean, everything you're saying, I'm so happy that comes through because, you know, a sheet pan of roasted vegetables or any cooked vegetable, any cooked anything is great. Like you don't really need to do more. A little fat and salt, olive oil and salt is really all you need. But if you just take that moment to like squeeze the lemon on top afterwards, put a few drops of vinegar, or if you have the time and interest to make something a little jazzier, you know, that carrot miso dressing, for example, which I put with roasted broccoli, you know, you're just going to get so much more interest. You're going to get so many more layers. And roasted vegetables, I think, are just a great example for this because when you roast vegetables, I mean, it's one of my favorite ways to cook vegetables because they just get sweet and concentrated and a little caramelized. But then you have this sheet pan of vegetables that all taste kind of one-dimensional, like sweet and concentrated and caramelized, which is great. But adding something a little acidic just balances that out. Adding an extra pinch of salt, you know, then you're not just having something sweet, you're having something sweet with like a touch of acid, a touch of salt, and it doesn't take much. It really can be just like a half a lemon that you squeeze, you know, and try to catch the seeds with your hands as best you can. You know, it doesn't have to be complicated, but it just having that like extra little moment, that extra little, like, I'm just going to zhuzh this up is, I think, what really does separate, like good home cooking from great home cooking. I think it's also where like a lot of the fun and pleasure can be found. And it's not that, you know, again, it's not one is better than the other. Like when I just said separates good from great, like I don't even mean it as a hierarchy. I just mean like you add this extra thing and it's like you've just given whatever you're cooking like a little bit more thought, a little bit more love. And I think it shows and it just tastes better. So yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's also an area where maybe people can get comfortable with improvisation, right? Once they,
yes.
And with these dressings and stuff, you know, maybe they've made enough so that there's a little off to the side. And then the next day they're like, I'm throwing carrot miso on something else. And exactly. I'm going to add these toasted pumpkin seeds to this other thing. And like suddenly... Yes. They're doing it. They're sparkling things up.
Yeah, I know this is a podcast, so people aren't like watching us, but like you just like smiled so much when you said that. And that's what makes me so excited is like that moment when someone, maybe they follow a recipe from my book. Maybe they make this carrot miso dressing, which is really easy and really good. And maybe they don't use it all on the roasted broccoli and there's a little left over. And then the next day they just have this moment of like, oh, I can put that on my bowl of rice. Like I can put that on my salad. And that little moment, like, I live for that moment. Mm-hmm. And like, because I think that's when people learn instinct, intuition, like they build some confidence. They just experience like the joy and pleasure that can be found in cooking. And the satisfaction, I will say, of like using up something left over. That's like my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I just had like a winning parenting moment. I had a young adult child living with me right now, and she was making this bowl of rice for lunch, and she got out the pickled red onions, and she was going to put them like, well, okay, way to level
up.
That's
awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of, you made this book with your parents.
Yes.
Can you tell us about how this became a family project and what that was like?
Sure. What a joy. So my parents, how do I make a long story short? My parents both have worked in and around publishing for a very long time, but doing very different work than I do. So they met in an art department of a magazine. My mom was the art director, and she hired my dad as a graphic designer. And they both worked primarily in the design side of editorial. And my mom has been retired for a long time. And my dad runs his own small business, actually designing books, but mostly interior decorating books. That's like his niche. And throughout my career being a cookbook author, I have asked them a million questions. I've run book designs by them to get their input and advice. When I've had trouble articulating something, they've helped me find the right words for it. So they've been very, very supportive of my work, but I've never had the opportunity to actually work with them as designers. And that is because every book I've worked on has been designed by whoever was like the in-house designer at whatever publisher I was working with. And I've had wonderful experiences. But with this book, I was working with Flatiron Books, which is the first time I've worked with them. And early on in the process, they said they were going to hire an outside designer. They were going to hire like a freelance designer. So, someone who doesn't work for them. And they asked me if there's anyone I'd like to work with. And I thought it would be great to finally actually work with my parents as opposed to just running things by them. So I got to be their client, and it was such a fantastic experience. I think my parents are great at what they do. And I've seen them work my entire life. They're both total workaholics, and I have seen them put together pages of books and magazines forever, but to watch them put that kind of care and attention into my book was just like one of the most wonderful experiences. And they are just so fun and funny together. And it was great. And they're very decisive in places where I am not so decisive. That was really helpful. And it just felt like a real collaborative, creative endeavor. And I used to feel a little upset that my parents work so much and that I work so much, and we all are you suffer from workaholism. And I used to feel like, I wish we could have more hobbies together, and not just talk about work all the time. But then with this book, I don't know, I just kind of leaned into it, and I was like, it's pretty incredible we have this huge thing in common, and that we get to spend time together in this way. And so that's, I guess, more of something I've worked through in therapy. But it was great. And the best thing I've heard so far is my best friend Cleo, when she looked at the book for the first time, she was like, this book really looks like you and feels like you. And, yes, I did the photos and the handwriting, the stuff we talked about, but I think it's also a real testament to my parents' work as designers here, because I think they know how to translate, the feeling of an author into the pages.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about just sort of the overall content, because we haven't touched on that yet. One thing that I noticed as a person who's mostly vegetarian, that there's just a lot of vegetable recipes. Obviously, there's meat too. There's main dishes. There's side dishes that could be main dishes. And maybe just talk about your thoughts on what's in the book. I think it could appeal to people who don't eat meat and people who do, equally.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that's been your impression. Yeah, the book, I think, really represents pretty much how I cook and eat on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, which is a little bit of everything. I shared a little bit about my sort of eating disorder history, and having any type of particular diet or restriction is just not something that works for me. So I welcome all foods. I'm lucky enough to not be allergic to anything. But within that, my personal preferences, the things I like and gravitate towards, include, a lot of vegetables. And a big part of that, you mentioned this in the introduction, is in between my last book and this one, I did spend a full growing season working on the crew at my favorite vegetable farm. And it's a place that I still spend a lot of time. I spend pretty much every Thursday morning there. I just basically pretend I still work there, even though I don't. And it's a big part of my life. And I am just pretty attached to this particular place that grows these wonderful vegetables. So I'm always just bringing tons of vegetables home and trying to figure out what to do with them. And I spend a lot of time talking to my farmer friends about what they're growing and what they're doing with it when they bring it home. And I think that's definitely reflected in the pages. I hope that the book feels, for anyone who picks it up, that there's sort of something for them in it, whatever their diet, their preferences. And I think it's a real mixture of things. When people ask me, what I do. And if I tell them, well, sometimes I don't get into it. Sometimes I just say I'm a farmer, because it's kind of true. But if I tell them I write cookbooks, then they're always like, oh, what kind of food do you cook? And that's been a question I've struggled with answering for a long time. Like, it seems really simple, but I've not known how to answer it. And the answer I'm working with these days is that I cook everything, and the work I do is from one home cook to another. And I really try to write recipes for other home cooks. That's why the recipes are so simple. That's why they pay a lot of attention to how much equipment you're using, because I hate washing dishes, stuff like that. So it means the food is really diverse. Like, it's from lots of places. It's influenced by lots of places and people. There's lots of different flavors going on here, but it's all stuff you can absolutely make at home with a lot of success.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did confess in the book that after Simply Julia, you felt like you were done with cookbooks, and that's what led you to the farm. What made you want to make a book again? And do you see more books in your future, or are you heading in another direction?
My editor at one point said, like, wow, you really mentioned that you were never going to work on a cookbook a lot of times in this cookbook, which was sort of funny. So yeah, I was pretty burned out after my last book. I had a great time making Simply Julia. It was a really wonderful experience. And I felt like I had that moment of kind of knowing when to leave the party. I just felt like this was great. And I think I've done it. Like, I don't think I have something new to say. It's part of, what you said, why I went to work at the farm. I just wanted to mix things up, do something different, work with a team, like work on a crew. And then after a certain point, I started my newsletter because I thought, oh, if I'm not going to do any more cookbooks, I still had like a few ideas percolating and I just wanted a place to put them. And I started really loving the format of a newsletter and making it a regular thing. And it's weekly, and it's actually about to become twice a week. And the charts were really born in my newsletter. I started doing them there, and I just loved doing them. And the response I got to them was so positive and enthusiastic. And I really felt like, oh, I think there's a book here. And I was kind of surprised by that thought, because I thought I was done. And I mean, something I've been really trying to practice in my life, not just in my work, but just in my life, is to just not be so all or nothing about everything, not be black and white about things. So I thought, okay, I feel compelled to try to do another book. And what are the reasons that I felt like I didn't want to do a book again? And is there a way to make a book and do things a little differently, so that I don't maybe encounter some of those things I didn't enjoy? So I approached the making of this book really differently. A big thing was taking the pictures myself, not producing a big photo shoot. It meant making the content more slowly. A big thing was getting to work with my parents, which was so joyful. A big thing was hiring Haley Scarpino, who she moderates the chat in all of my online classes. She's like my right hand in my classes. I hired Haley to cross-test all the recipes. So I really was very just particular about how I went about this book. And I approached it all a little differently. And it meant my experience of making it was just more positive than ever. I've always loved making books. The thing that has honestly caused me to question the going into it again is not the thing, but a thing has been promoting a book, doing the publicity around a book, because it's a lot of work. But I've learned to just try to not micromanage everything. I'm really trying, and to really embrace each opportunity to talk to someone like we're doing right now. Is just like a really nice opportunity just to talk to someone, to take some pressure off myself from trying to achieve anything numbers based, and to really redefine, I would say, my definition of success. And I really feel like success is, I don't know, today, I don't know exactly when you're airing this, but we're recording this a little bit before the book comes out. And I just got my first copies, and I mailed my best friends copies of the book. And my best friend, Cleo, texted me today, and she made the Italian wedding soup from the book tonight for dinner for her and her kids. And she texted me a picture of her kids like eating the soup, and she was like, it was such a hit, and she had like a really easy time making it. She loved it. They loved it. And I just like, I'm like, I did it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's it. You know, that's what I'm hoping for. And that feels really good. And so just trying to pay attention to moments like that. So with all that said, like, yeah, I would do it again. I don't have an idea at the moment. I don't know. I always have like a few ideas, but I'm not currently working on a new book, but I would do it again. I would love to do it again. And I also don't think there's a rush to do it. I used to churn them out really fast. And I think my work benefits from more time than I have always given it. And I can be pretty impatient. So that's something I'm working on.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I haven't gotten my hands on the physical copy yet. I'm really looking forward to it. But last night we did make the braised tofu, and that was really delicious.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
good.
I mean, it was
easy.
So fast. Yeah, like the time that it took to make the rice, the rest of it was done, which was excellent.
Yeah, I love hearing that.
Yeah, it's delicious. Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I have to say, your questions were just so thoughtful, and you pulled out such, I don't know, small, but I feel like small moments in the book that are the kind of thing where I'm like, oh, is anyone going to notice this? And it means a lot that you did, and I appreciate the thought you put into your questions. And yeah, this was wonderful.
Thank you. Well, we were delighted to have you here. We've been speaking with writer and cookbook author Julia Turshen. Thank you for joining us today at Eat, Drink, Think. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to pick up your local edible magazine. You can find show notes for today's episode at ediblecommunities.com.